Laboratory X-18. As the first X-Lab being visited by the player, it is one of the most unforgettable experiences in S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and one which poses a lot of questions. What kind of experiments were carried out here? By whom? And what disaster led to the facility becoming this? Hello stalkers, and welcome to the Anomalous Dugout. In this video we will try to answer these questions and more. Before we start, be aware that there will be major spoilers. And now let's recap. How did we end up here again? Oh yes, that's right. Last time we checked out the Agroprom underground and came to the conclusion that it was used as a chemical factory. The documents found also revealed that the Agroprom Institute was, for a time, a cover-up for a clandestine laboratory called X-18. And so here we are, time to take a close look at this lab. If you've not seen the previous episode about the Agroprom underground, I suggest you check it out before watching this video. So let's get on it. Laboratory X-18 is located in the Dark Valley, a place where a scientific center was being built. The history of this location is shrouded in mystery, and it's not really the subject of this video, so we won't talk much about it. Originally, the laboratory was closed. In order to unlock it, one would need 2 electronic keys. One of these keys is in possession of the barkeep, and the other is held by Borov, the bandit leader. It is unknown how the keys fell into these hands and how the barkeep knows about this stuff. But the important thing to remember is that the lab was supposed to be sealed until the Marked One opened it in 2012. Therefore, no one should be able to enter X-18 before that. Yet, there are clear signs that some people managed to get inside prior to Marked One's visit, as 2 freshly deceased stalkers can be found inside. The first, located near the entrance, is wearing a leather jacket and has almost no supplies on him, yet he holds the rank of expert. This makes me believe that he was a prisoner of the bandits, who forced him to go check inside the lab. Maybe the bandits had both keys to the lab at some point, but the stalkers stole one from them. Or it is also possible that other hidden entrances to the lab exist, perhaps connected to the large system of tunnels that lies under the Dark Valley. Indeed, the underground was used by mercenaries during the events of Clear Sky, and we know that mercenaries are very interested in the secret labs, so I would not be surprised if X-18 was their objective, and that they dug up a tunnel inside the lab to bypass the main locked door. And this leads us to our second corpse, who has a mercenary suit. However, this guy is marked as a loner, also has the rank of expert, and appears to be zombified. Much like the other body, he does not have much loot on him, so I'm not really sure what to think of this. Be sure to let me know your theories about this specific guy in the comments below. Moving on, another element that confirms the fact that stalkers were able to enter the lab is the presence of 2 stashes in the area. The first one, called the Left Behind Backpack, is not really interesting. Its description is bland and it only contains a few common supplies. The secret stash of Smoked, on the other hand, is much cooler. Its description confirms that stalkers managed to break into the lab, and that they know about the 2 keys. And the safe contains a very rare Night Star artifact and a monolith suit. Even more strange, the coordinates to both of these stashes seem to only be obtained on corpses of duty located in the Dark Valley and before you make your first visit to the lab. As the only people who meet these requirements are duty scouts who infiltrated the bandit territory, I believe that the stashes were not made by duty, but by bandits, and that the info was stolen by the scouts. If that's the case, it would support the idea that the bandits had the two keys at some point, but that one of them was stolen by Barkeep's men. As for the monolith suit, a second one can actually be found inside the locker room of the lab, along with other supplies and an AK rifle. Here's my theory on this. The suits that now belong to the Monolith faction used to be the regular suits of the security personnel working in the X-Labs. I think it makes perfect sense that the C consciousness, who is controlling the Monolith faction and used to be the owner of the X-Labs, would reuse the material at hand to supply its troops. And so this smoked guy who made the stash simply found one of these suits in the lab and put it in a safe, so that the poltergeist would not throw it around. Speaking of the poltergeists, evidence suggests that these creatures were created inside the lab, because they are trapped in the lower levels. According to the PDA entries found in the facility, one of the experiments that were carried out was to expose test subjects to different types of psi emissions. It is even mentioned that during an experiment, 24 test subjects managed to escape and mess up some equipment. Fortunately, the scientists were able to lock them up inside, and the security guards dealt with the subjects, suffering a few bites. Of course, these test subjects were not humans. They were animals, probably laboratory rats or something like this. But it is mentioned that experimentation on larger creatures and potentially humans was going to take place afterwards. So it is not hard to imagine that an experiment on humans went horribly wrong and created the poltergeists, which started to attack the personnel and eventually caused the lab to be abandoned. In fact, it is possible to find 4 corpses of workers in the lab. 2 of them are simply skeletons, indicating that they were devoured by mutants, and the other 2 were not eaten because of their protective suits. One of them is Kalugin, the chief of Lab X-18. You can even see that they are equipped with weapons despite being part of the scientific staff and not the security staff, which clearly means that the experiments got out of control. I mean, who needs an RPG in a laboratory? Anyway, my theory is that Lab X-18 was not abandoned because of the creation of the zone in 2006. I think the lab continued to function after that. And for me, the real reason for the state it's in is the release of the test subjects, mainly the poltergeists, but also a pyrogeist and a pseudo-giant. In the last video about the Agroprom, we saw that it was also a possibility for the Institute to have continued its operations until 2008, even though we're not sure if it's a mistake or not. But the main reason which makes me believe that the lab must have stayed in activity after the appearance of the zone is this. Inside boxes you can find artifacts. This can only mean one thing. Employees of the lab got out in the zone, so the Anomalies collected some artifacts and stored them here for further research. By the way, the fact that these artifacts probably date from the early days of the zone and yet are still the same as the ones in Shadow of Chernobyl gives even more credibility to my theory on artifacts, which I already presented in another video. But back to the lab. If I'm correct, and X-18 was still working after the zone was born, and was only shut down due to another kind of disaster, then it is possible that other laboratories in the zone are still active to this day. This would explain a lot of things, but that's a subject for another time. Now let's take a closer look at what we can find in the lab, and what we can conclude out of it. First of all, I would like to mention that there are many closed doors and even an unused elevator in the area, which clearly shows that X-18 is bigger than what the player is able to explore. In other words, we can only see some parts of the facility, but not everything. This is also backed up by the fact that the data which needs to be retrieved is called Documents from Lab X-18 Part 4, implying that there are at least 3 other parts in the papers. Moving on, in this room we can see some special tanks that contain an unknown hazardous substance. One of the tanks has a tube which is disconnected and lying on the floor, and heat is escaping from the tube. The tanks are connected to a large machine, and then to a nearby pool. This pool not only contains the chemical substance that is coming from the tanks, but also a fruit punch anomaly. All of this reminds a lot of everything we observed last time in the Agroprom Underground, and to me it is quite obvious that this chemical product, whatever it may be, was produced and stored in the Agroprom Underground. This is the link between the Institute and the X-Labs we've been looking for. Also in the corner there is a broken tank and a lot of radiation around it, so I'm pretty sure that the chemical substance inside is highly radioactive. Again, something we saw in the Agroprom. The same tanks can be found in another room down the stairs, and here once again they are leaking a lot of radiation. Besides, the tanks are connected to a strange machine, which is also supplied in electricity. It looks like the chemical would be spread in the middle in the form of a gas. Further down into the lab, there is a room with large tanks that probably contain more toxic substance. And there is a weird machine hanging from a rail in the ceiling, which looks like a giant microscope. And guess at what this thing is looking at? That's right, more of our chemical stuff. The exact same equipment can be found in another room not very far, the one with the stash of the smoked. Then there is the largest room in X-18, where the pseudo-giant is. It really looks like a storage area, with containers and boxes all around. Besides that, we can also see a lot of pipes and tubes going around, much like in the Agroprom Underground. Most likely these are used to transport the chemical components in different parts of the lab. Finally we get to the last area, the control center. Here we can find more storage boxes with both toxic and radiation hazard symbols on it. There are also strange looking devices that look like an hexagon with antennas. I believe these are early designs for Kamenov emitters, the machines that produce psi emissions. Most likely it was those that were used to try the emissions on test subjects. In this room we have futuristic looking pods. They are all empty, but it is possible that they contain the test subjects as well. They also look like the pods used by the Sea Consciousness. On the other wall we see cages for small test subjects, with grids that may be able to spread toxic gases inside. The body of a rodent here hints at the fact that the rodents might also have been created in Lab X-18, but it's possible that they all escaped, using the ventilation system thanks to their small size. Just under the control room we have other types of pods, which contain the dead body of strange mutants. It is unknown what those are supposed to be. Maybe they're poltergeists, but I'm not sure, they have no arms. Anyway, this pretty much confirms that the lab did create some mutants. Also notice that these pods are connected with different kind of tubes and wires. Considering all the things we've seen, I think it is quite obvious that chemicals played a large role inside X-18. My theory is that the chemical products are part of the process which turns living creatures into mutants, because I find it hard to believe that Psi emissions would be able to create such monsters on their own. Sure, they can turn people into zombies or have an influence on their brain, but such drastic changes in morphology and biology seems a bit too much. Therefore, I think mutants, such as the poltergeists and the pseudo-giant, were created using unknown chemicals that are both toxic and radioactive, and that were produced in the Agroprom underground. Most likely it was the combination of these chemical products with psi waves that were responsible for the poltergeists and other mutants acquiring such unique skills like telekinesis. But this is just my own analysis of the lab. So if I've missed an important information, or if you have other theories, please share it in the comments below. Before we end this video, there is one last thing we need to mention about the history of the lab, which is the fact that it was raided by the military just after Mark I's visit. It is unknown if the army managed to secure the lab, because Mark I probably killed the first soldiers on his way out, and it is possible that he used the keys to close the lab once again. So the fate of X-18 after the events of Shadow of Chernobyl remains a mystery for now. Hopefully we will get answers in April 2022. As for now, I thank you for watching, stalkers, and goodbye.